Fear is one of those topics that is everywhere, and it's pretty obvious right now in this world what is going on that could be driving you to feel more fearful. In this video, we're going to break down two key aspects to how we can face our fears and move through into that greater loving space for holding our sense and desire of peace for all in the world.
Allow your heart to listen.
Hello, I'm Nid. I'm a soul guide and I support people through spiritual awakening, which effectively is the slap in the face of meeting your deepest and darkest fears, quite often existential, because they're really to do with what's the point of life? Why are you here? What's the purpose of your breath and what you do with every day? And so fear is a huge part of the work that sits underneath soul guidance. And it comes in many amazing shapes and forms. And I know for myself that I'm someone who's pretty good at masking my own fears by being really just quite intelligent and rational around situations. And what I realized was that in doing that, there's a lot of denial that happens when I think I'm really good. I think that I've got it sussed. And part of that is because some people, when faced with a intense situation of deep fear, like about to be attacked, can be really rational, logical, see the steps that they need to take to get themselves out of that situation. And I can hand on heart say that that's really me. I am very good at getting myself out of some pretty challenging situations because I have that capacity to be very rational in intense moments. But not everyone has that capacity, depending on how your fight-flight nervous system activates and whether or not you can take those rational steps. Now, if you are someone who goes into that shutdown, it means that often there can be a desire to avoid dealing with a situation, with having to find whatever the courage is that's going to move you forwards. And after we've been in a very upsetting and deeply traumatizing experience, whether you're someone like me who can be rational and move through and take action, or you're someone who has frozen or not been able to take action, has shut down and become smaller, both of those can have a habit of not really then wanting to face that fear, to process it and let it release from the body afterwards. One of my favorite pieces of simple teaching from the animal kingdom is that after animals have been through such life-threatening type of experience of intense fear, they often lie down and shake and just let the trauma move through their nervous system and release. But, you know, we as humans, we don't really lie down in the street and shake. You might do some shaking for yourself. You might know some techniques to help release your body from some of that stress that's holding on, and some nervous system regulation exercises. And they are going to come up in this series with some of the people that we talk to in the interviews, as well as some of the practices that I share. But I wanted us to drop into the contemplation and awareness of why it's so hard for us to release when really our system, our way of connecting with one another actually perpetuates more fear. So even if you do manage to have a little shakeout and release some of it, it often just builds up again, and then it builds up again and again. And so it can be really hard to move through those layers of fear. And so either we stay hyperlogical, hyper-rational, doing things, solving things, problem-fixing things, or we stay in avoidance. Maybe there's procrastination, doing everything but the thing that you need to do in order to move forwards. And what both of these two strategies are doing is really avoiding a whole person, a whole sense and brain way of processing and moving forwards so that we can release the fear and actually come into love. But what I would really encourage us to actually see it as is common sense. So common sense is one of those amazingly difficult to define phrases. With common sense, we have definitions like good sense and sound judgment in practical matters, judgment that is reasonable decision making and makes safety. But where does that come from? How can common sense be so hard for us to define, whereas logic, that rational side of either avoiding or taking the following steps, is more to do with corrected reasoning and principles of validity with proof and evidence-based systemic approaches and steps. But one of the key pieces of rationality is that it requires a basic premise as a foundation for the rationality to move on from. And what happens with logic is that the basic premise will be I am unsafe and need to do or not do in order to maintain safety. So where logic is used on its own, it's only perpetuating the fear pattern. So we need to step away from logic being the whole part of what common sense needs. Common sense has some judgment. It has some of this decision making, but it's not just logical because it doesn't have the premise of fear underneath it that we are needing to avoid or engage with to stop. What common sense has is the practicality of sense and soundness for the whole scenario. And that starts to bring us into all of the senses. Sense, right? Good sense, a sensible judgment of soundness. So we can see that the senses, that common sense means the use of the senses. And when we start to engage our senses, they have different layers of reactivity and sensitivity. We may become really hyper aware and hyper vigilant when we have a spiritual awakening or when we have a trauma that happens to us. And that means we're hyper vigilant. We're always looking for the threat, right? To then stay in that premise of logic of deal with it or avoid it. But with common sense, we want to use that hypervigilance as a way of actually learning to go quieter and deeper within. So we have to tone our hypersensitivity to the external world and listen more to the senses internally. And as those internal senses become louder by quietening the external world, we actually start to tune into what may be called the clair senses. And these are the psychic senses for some. Now, the reality is that when you quiet the external senses that are looking for the next external threat and you listen internally, that is where all of the senses can come together and form that good judgment of what to do. And in itself, it comes back to being really centered and grounded in the heart and in the belly to give us this guidance of what will open the heart and also what will ease our way of processing life experiences so that we can become stronger, more in our center, more on our purpose, and more aligned. And so, yes, this probably sounds like intuition, and that is true. It is that left brain and right brain working cohesively together. It's activating our intuition and using logic in order to create common sense. So common sense is the way to move yourself out of being in fear and learning to find a way to navigate and make decisions based on using all of the senses that are quieter and more subtle than the alert, jumping, and reactivity to the external world. And I was talking with someone around how could you start to distinguish when you are using what I like to call sense logic as opposed to common sense, because there's a logic to actually using the senses that is more nuanced than the definitions that are obviously put out there because they don't really understand what is happening within those inner judgments. So I wanted to tap in and offer a little bit more for you to contemplate and sift through in the back of your mind and your energy centers and see whether or not your senses can start to come online. So when we open the nervous system to listen more within as well as its hypersensitivity without, that external hypersensitivity is the sign. It is the sign to go in, to start to tune in. Now, of course, if you are in an external environment that has real risk right in front of you, you need to not be there, and you don't necessarily go within, as in deny the scenario that you're in. But what helps with coming into this ability to use and access common sense when you're in danger is to actually let these inner senses come on board. So when you're in a safe place, you want to practice toning down the external senses and coming into the inner ones. And this is where practices like our body scan and yoga nidra can be super helpful in starting to tune in to those quieter inner senses and what is happening within. So that then when you're in an external environment that asks, oh my God, I need to deal with this big stress, your inner senses are activated and you can hear them. So number one is notice if you've become more hypersensitive, that's the sign that it's time to tune in to the inner senses. And practice with each of your inner senses. So internal seeing through your imagination. And not everyone is visual. I don't often see things, but I can give a visual description to what it is that I sense. It may be that it's more of a feeling, more of an inner movement, more of a sense of an emotion or a pattern of something moving through. And so this is also part of our clairsenses, our cognizance. You might hear things and it might be in your own voice. It might be a song. It might be the lyrics of something. It might be some words from a film that you like. That can be guidance. That can be ways in which words are coming through. The easiest thing to think with your clairsenses, with that intuition coming online and listening inwards, is it's going to be in the way that you enjoy connecting with your senses and things that you relate to and are actually going to go, oh yeah, that has a meaning to me. So one of my simple examples was with my stepfather when he was unable to speak, and I said to him, oh, you send me a message through a visual and let's see if I can perceive what your message is. And then I saw this dog and I was like, why are you sending me a dog? I'm asking you about what you want to eat for lunch. And he kind of smiled at me. And he was testing me by sending me a dog rather than anything to do with the food. Now, the meaning and my ability to interpret, because it was from him, I had to think about how does he think? What does he want to communicate and share? And how would he do that? What would he think was fun? And he was being playful, but also, dogs going for walks, that was a meaningful connection for him to share with me. Whereas my interpretation, right, I have to think about the context of who am I interpreting from. So when you listen to your inner senses, your interpretation should be from yourself. You are the guidance. So it can sometimes be hard to distinguish between the guidance from your higher self, from those inner senses, because it seems a bit similar to your own normal way of thinking and doing. But there will be slight shifts. Like I said, it might be a song, it might be words from a script that you really like. But let all of your senses come alive. And this can also be where it's confusing, because if we have lots of unmet emotions, thoughts, judgments, opinions, experiences that we haven't processed, sometimes that can feel quite dominating and not particularly comfortable, and that has to be processed and met. And so if there's an uncomfortable part that rises, it's recognizing and saying, okay, this isn't comfortable. Where have you come from? What are you trying to show me? And that openness and willingness will take you deeper into connecting with subtle senses, into feeling and receiving more guidance for that common sense to actually come online when things are busier in life, when there's louder external noises around you. And so tuning into your senses starts to actually bring a balance of objectivity and subjectivity for yourself and for holding other people, and for other people to start to tune into and become aware that that place is available for them. If you feel safe, another person is going to be drawn to feeling, well, why are you safe? How can I feel that? And so they'll start to move into safety because you're in it. And so tuning into these senses and allowing that common sense to hold and to guide your own decisions will support others in finding their strength to do the same thing. So just a small reminder that although some of this is talking about intuition, it is balanced with rational logic. It's actually the both coming together. When we listen to all of these senses and they all coordinate together, that's where the common sense piece connects with logic to take a sensible step. So my collective example for this is that if we are currently moving into a higher conscious state, may not always feel and seem like it according to the external world and events, but as consciousness elevates, the most common teaching is non-dualistic, that we have a unity. It's the time of the Aquarian age, that all is one. There could be no space for separation for a 5D world and a 3D world, because that perpetuates separation and duality. So seeing that that's not logical, that's still got a fear, it actually makes no sense, right? To be moving into a higher state of unity, but still to perpetuate separation and divisiveness. And so that doesn't meet our common sense. That doesn't hold logic and the sensibilities together. It's actually a nonsense. And I call it nonsense logic because it's logic that doesn't make any sense. And so if we can see where those moments arise, what's the premise of which this logic is being presented, and if we put a little bit of sense into it, what does that take? But also sometimes we can have something that's got so much logic that's got so much sense in it, so much feeling, but it needs a bit of logic in order for it to actually also make sense. So inviting you with fear to meet it with both the senses and logic, and see if you can start to open your heart to feeling the safety and well-being that is within you, that is always guiding you to make those choices that will keep you safe, that will keep you well, and will help encourage others to come into that place of safety and well-being with you. Please share and comment below, where are you feeling those fears and which senses are waking up for you that you're starting to really get guidance from, that is navigating you towards greater safety and well-being. I hope that you enjoy the rest of this Facing Fears series. It's powerful. We've got amazing guests, and each week we'll alternate between a guest and then coming back to a practice. So make sure you hit subscribe so that you get each of those episodes as they're released to your inbox. Much love and have a wonderful week.
Thank you for joining. Have a wonderful day.